All right, all the expected commissioners are here, Chair. You may proceed when you're ready.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, August 24th, 2022. This meeting is now called to order and I will ask staff to call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Thomas.
Here.
Commissioner Tavana.
Here.
Commissioner Janoff.
Here.
Commissioner Clark.
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Here.
Chair Hansen.
Here as well.
And let the record show that Commissioner Raspi is not with us this evening.
Thank you for that, Ms. Armour, and I will leave it with you as well to address the rules of decorum and civility for our public meetings.
The public is welcome to participate in the meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meeting is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. For the benefit of the entire community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the agenda. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at board, commission, or committee meetings. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at board, commission, or committee meetings. All public comments at the board, commission, or committee meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the chair may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the commissioners exiting the chamber or meeting room. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the commissioners would return to the chamber or meeting room and the chair would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a board, commission, or committee meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code, Section 403.
Thank you for that. And so we will go to the next item on the agenda, which is verbal communications. And as a precursor to that, the town encourages public participation in all of its meetings, and that participation can take a couple of different forms. First is written communications. Written communications received through staff are always welcome and helpful to this commission. And in the case of tonight's meeting, we did get a comment from comments from the public on both of the items that are on our main agenda. And then we also encourage verbal communications, and there's two opportunities to participate in verbal communications. The first is now on the agenda, which is an opportunity to speak on items that are not on the agenda. And then during the hearing of a specific item on the agenda, there's an additional opportunity to speak on that item. We do ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. So I'd like to ask if there is any member of the public that would like to speak now in verbal communications on items that are not on the agenda.
If so, please raise your hand. I see one hand raised, though I believe she wants to speak on an item later, but we will allow Bess to speak. Is this on an item that is not on the agenda?
Hi, Jennifer. I don't have the agenda in front of me and I'm logging on for all the architects in town. So maybe it's a later item and I just don't have, I'm trying to pull up the agenda and can't.
Yeah, I believe you're interested in speaking about objective standards.
Yes.
That's item number 3. So we'll promote you at that time.
Great. Thank you.
All right, and then the option is still open for anyone else that would like to speak on any items that are not on the agenda at this time. And if so, please raise your hand.
I don't see any other hands raised, Chair.
Okay, so then we will move on. And the next item on the agenda is our consent calendar. Any member of the public or the commission is able to pull items from the consent calendar for consideration during the public hearing portion of the meeting. The only item on the consent calendar for this evening is the draft minutes of the August 10th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting, which was our last meeting. Is there any member of the public or the commission that would like to pull this item for consideration during the public hearing? Don't see any hands raised. Are there any commissioners that have any recommended changes to the minutes before we take a motion? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, may I get a motion for approval of the consent calendar? Commissioner Clark.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you for that. And it looked like Commissioner Thomas had her hand up as well. Is that a second?
Yes, I second.
All right, thank you for that. And so now I will call the question and please answer yes, no, or abstain. And I will start with Commissioner Tabana.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so it passes unanimously. And so now we can go on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 2 in the public hearings portion of the agenda. And item 2 is to consider an appeal of the Development Review Committee's decision to approve a request for construction of a new single-family residence and site improvements requiring a grading permit on property zoned R18, located at 17291 Wedgwood Avenue, APN 409-14-013, architecture and site application 5-21-027. Property owner is Young Kim. Applicant is Edic Lazari, and the appellant is Douglas Scott Maynard, and our project planner is Sean Mullen. May I please see a show of hands from commissioners that have been able to visit the subject property? And are there any disclosures on this item? Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes, I'm recusing myself on this item for personal reasons. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. So we will see you back for item 3 when we're finished with this item. Okay, and then I believe the staff report will be given by Mr. Mullen.
Thank you and good evening. Before you this evening is an appeal of the Development Review Committee's decision to approve construction of a new residence at 17291 Wedgwood Avenue. The subject property is located on the northwest corner of the intersection of Wedgwood Avenue and Browns Lane and is currently developed with a single-family residence. The project includes the construction of a new 2-story residence with an attached garage and site work requiring a grading permit. The proposed residence would not be the largest in the immediate neighborhood in terms of floor area or FAR, and would not be the first 2-story residence in the immediate neighborhood. The proposed residence was reviewed by the town's consulting architect, who remarked that the project is modest in size with an overall mass and articulation sympathetic to the immediate neighborhood. The consulting architect made 6 recommendations for changes that were addressed by the applicant through design revisions. The applicant also indicates that the existing residence would be converted into an accessory dwelling unit, which may be accomplished through a ministerial action and not subject to review by the Planning Commission. On July 12th of this year, the Development Review Committee considered the proposal, received public comments, and approved the project with modified conditions of approval addressing privacy concerns expressed by neighbors. On July 22nd of this year, the property owner at 17323 Wedgwood appealed the DRC's decision. The appellant raised the following points in their letter. The proposed residence impacts their privacy, and the DRC's approval did not adequately address these concerns. The two-story residence is not compatible with the immediate neighborhood. The brutalist design of the residence should not be permitted. It is the intent of the property owner to create 4 rental units. The immediate neighborhood was not defined correctly. The proposed residence will increase freeway noise to the neighborhood. There are other options available to the property owner other than a two-story residence, and there is a history of unpermitted work on the property. The applicant provided a written response to the appellant's letter that is included with your staff report this evening. The staff report includes staff's analysis of each of the points raised by the appellant, as well as an analysis of the project itself. Based on the analysis provided in the staff report, staff recommends that the Planning Commission deny the appeal and uphold the decision of the Development Review Committee to approve the project. A desk item was distributed this afternoon with additional public comment received after publishing the staff report. And this concludes staff's presentation, and we are available to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mullen. I'd like to ask if any commissioners have questions for staff at this time. And just as a reminder for everyone watching, there is also an opportunity for commissioners to ask questions of staff after we close the public hearing. So now I will open the public hearing. And the way the process works with an appeal, we start with the appellant, and you have up to 5 minutes to address the commission, and then we'll have the applicant.
So if you would go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to speak on behalf of the appellant. All right. We will allow you to talk. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself, and you have up to 5 minutes.
Okay, this is Douglas Maynard. Can everybody hear me? Yes, okay. So can you pull up my visual presentation for me? If you can go to page 2, this is a photograph of the street. So Wedgwood Avenue is kind of like a country road. It's less of a subdivision kind of street and more of, you know, sort of a country type of atmosphere. And what we're doing, we're asking to reduce the size and mass of this two-story house. It's just too big. It's too massive a show on the front on Wedgwood. The residential design guidelines say the mass and height of the house should be consistent with the houses in the immediate neighborhood and on either side of it. 100% of the houses in the immediate neighborhood have one-story roof lines. They do not have higher roof lines than that. In addition, our property adjoins on the left side toward the rear where our pool and garden are. And this project totally eliminates our privacy in the backyard, which we have had for 27 years. If you could now go to page 8. Page 8 is from the residential design guidelines, and this defines what the immediate neighborhood is. And so according to the guidelines, it is these 7 houses surrounding the site, the ones that are highlighted in yellow. So it's the corner parcel because of Brown's Lane there. And so if you can go to page 9, these are the 7 parcels. My house is 2 doors down. My son is the one behind that's marked William Maynard, and his house, his property adjoins it on the left side. If you can go to number 10, 2-story houses. This is from the residential design guidelines. 2-story houses may not be appropriate for every neighborhood. For neighborhoods dominated by 1-story homes, an effort should be made to limit the house to 1 story in height or to accommodate second floor space within the existing roof. Can you go to page 11, please? On page 11, it shows that we're supposed to match our roof pitches or the height of the house to what's around it. So if you can go to page 14 now, here we have, again, our lot plan. It's not that I don't like 2-story houses. I grew up in a 2-story house. I think we have a semantics problem talking both to the town planners and to the neighbor, because the issue is not so much that it's a 2-story house, but the height and the mass of the house. And if we can go to number 16, I'm going to show you all the houses in the immediate neighborhood. This one is mine. So you can see by the green marking that this is number one in the immediate neighborhood. It's a one-story house. It's a little over 2,600 square feet. If we go to page 17, this is the one that they say is a two-story house. It was always been a one-story house, and they took the existing attic and they sheetrocked it, put a floor in, and they did not raise the roof. So it still has a one-story roof line. If you can go to number 18, this is the house behind the project. And this house actually looks way better than in the picture. It's really a little dollhouse. It's gorgeous. It's small. It's a one-story house. If you go to the one behind that, that's a one-story house. That's number 19. You go to number 20, that's also a one-story house. This is about 2,500 square feet. This is what we think he ought to do with the project. And he has plenty of room to do this kind of a house there. It's a gorgeous house, and that's what we think belongs in the neighborhood. Go to 21. This is the house in front of that, a little closer to the site. It's just a typical ranch style house. If we go to page 22, this is the house number 7 in front on Wedgwood Avenue. So I'd like to show you what the story poles look like on this property. I know some of you have been there. If we go to number 23, I don't know if you can see it very well, but you can see the story poles up, and the story poles are twice as high as these houses. If you go to number 24, this is a little closer. That first one was from the back of Browns Lane. This is a little closer. Compare it to the ADU, which is on the right there. If we go to number 25, this is looking at what they say is a two-story house. The story poles are almost twice as high as this house that they're saying is a two-story house that was built as a one-story and has the same roof line as it originally did. If we can go to 27, skip one, go to 27. This is what it looks like from our backyard. This house is going to be looking right into our pool and patio and garden area. If we can move to 28, you can see the house from the front, or the story poles from the front. This is a massive, massive house, and it's just too big for the neighborhood.
I'm sorry, but that is the end of the 5 minutes.
All right, thank you.
But I will see if any commissioners have any questions for you, the appellant. Do any commissioners have questions for the appellant at this time? You will, of course, have another opportunity to ask questions of the appellant because he will be coming to speak again after we take public comments. Okay, so it looks like no commissioners have questions. So then we will now turn to the applicant, and the applicant has also up to 5 minutes to address the commission.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay? Great. Jennifer, would you mind pulling up the presentation? And could I ask you for a favor to see if you can put that into full screen mode? You can press Control L or go down to the view pull down menu and put it into full screen. Control L will do it.
That does not seem to be working.
Okay,
This
maybe
is what
go
we
to
got.
the view next to File Edit and then put it into full screen. Yeah. Yep, and then full screen mode. If you scroll a little bit further down. Yep, great. Thank you so much. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Claire, and I'm here to speak on behalf of my parents, the homeowners of 17291 Wedgwood Avenue. We believe our presentation tonight will demonstrate that in addition to meeting the basic findings required for approval as Sean described, the proposed plan has also been designed, then further revised in careful consideration of its potential impact on the surrounding neighbors. Next slide, please. This exhibit demonstrates why building a single-story home would be infeasible due to a number of site constraints. In addition to code-required setbacks, the property is required to provide a 20-foot right-of-way dedication, another 10-foot utility easement, and maintain construction offsets for trees that will remain on the property. Additionally, the converted ADU, a garage with enough space for 2 cars and some overflow storage, and a backyard further restricted the potential buildable area. Next slide, please. The numbers on this map represent the 2-story homes in the vicinity of the proposed home, which is in yellow. The red outline delineates the extent of the immediate neighborhood, as Sean mentioned in his staff report. Based on this existing context, a 2-story home is neither unprecedented nor out of character, but compatible with the existing immediate neighborhood. Next slide, please. As shown with snapshots of the letters we've received, the majority of the neighbors provided support of the proposed plans, expressing that the home is a welcome addition to their neighborhood. Next slide, please. The appellant and his son expressed concerns regarding the potential loss of privacy for a portion of their shared yard, which is the portion of 14344 La Rinconada outlined in red on this aerial view. Next slide, please. This is representative of the changes that have been made to the ground floor to address concerns from the appellant. As you'll see on the current plan on the right, the home was moved closer to Wedgwood, and the building envelope was modified in order to provide additional setbacks upwards of 11.5 feet. Next slide, please. On the left is the originally proposed second floor design, and the right is the current plan with the original overlaid in blue. As you can see, we moved the building footprint away from the appellant's pool area and changed the floor plan so that the windows are now set back an additional 5 to 12 feet. Please also note that there is only one clerestory window between the 2 sides of the elevation, so to the west and east. And this decision was made in consideration of the 2 properties that are immediately to the west and east, so that there is privacy maintained for those homes that are closest to ours. Next slide, please. The 3 main things to note from this last slide is that the proposed second floor now sits 75 feet away from the fence line between us and the appellant's pool area. Additionally, as shown here in the highlighted green, there's actually only about 20 feet of shared property line between the 2 properties. Please note that per the appellant's request, my parents have already paid for half the cost of constructing a new 6-foot fence along that shared property line as of January of last year. And lastly, we've also agreed to a condition of approval to add planting along that shared property line to provide privacy screening between the 2 properties. The various changes that have been made, including the deepened setbacks and the complete overhaul of the building envelope and floor plans, will result in very limited visibility, if any, from the proposed second floor windows to a small sliver of the appellant's backyard. In a smaller lot, single family neighborhoods like these, some visibility of one another's yards or even homes is often unavoidable and an inherent part of living there. Nevertheless, we believe the proposed design has been developed and modified to address all of the neighbors' concerns, including those of the appellant, to the extent that is feasible and reasonable. And lastly, we'd like to make very clear to the commission, staff, and most importantly to our neighbors, that there are absolutely no plans whatsoever to convert the property, either legally or illegally, into 4 rental units. My parents intend to live in their new home by spending time with family and friends for years to come, and the proposed plans are nothing but a reflection of that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I'd like to ask if any commissioners have questions of the applicant at this time. Okay, I don't see any hands. Oh, I don't see any hands raised. So then we will go to public comments. And so now I would like to invite any members of the public who would like to speak on this item, and you have up to 3 minutes. And if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand.
So if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand. Does not look like we've got, oh, Now, we do have one interested party, Will. I will allow you to speak now. You have 3 minutes. You should be able to unmute yourself, Will.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I don't know what happened. Zoom froze on me when I got the prompt. My name is Will Maynard. I am the appellant, Douglas Maynard's son. I live at 14344 La Rinconada Drive with my wife. I'd just like to say first that I do really appreciate the effort that they've gone to address our privacy concerns.
Will, just a moment. I'd like to check in with our town attorney. I believe your name was, well, you didn't sign the appeal. I believe your name was listed on the appeal, and I want to confirm whether you should be part of the appellant's allocated time.
Yes, Mr. Maynard can either speak, he can speak in the rebuttal time that's allocated to the appellant.
Okay, thank you. So Will, we do have an additional 3 minutes allocated at the end, but we will defer your speaking until that time rather than during this public comment.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Ever. I was having the same thought, and I'm glad you brought it up before we proceeded. And so then I would like to ask if there's any other members of the public that are not part of the applicant or appellant that would like to speak on this item. Okay, I don't see any additional hands raised. Okay, so then the procedure now is, since we don't have any additional public comments, we will give up to 3 minutes to the applicant and then finally to the appellant to address the commission.
So if someone part of the applicant's team, Claire or somebody else would like to speak, you do have an additional 3 minutes that you could speak if you have anything to add.
I don't think that we have anything else to add at this time. We're happy to answer questions if the commissioners have any, but I think I was able to get everything in within the 5 minutes allotted.
Okay, I would like to let the commissioners know that this is the last opportunity to ask questions of the applicant and then the appellant once the appellant speaks, because after that I'll be closing the public hearing. Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, I know you were saying about your parents living there. Are you planning to rent out the ADU, or what will be done with that structure?
That is still TBD. The existing structure has been there for a while, and they've put a lot of time and resources into improving that structure. So they want to keep it in place, but there's no specific plans for the ADU as of yet.
Great, thank you. I would highly encourage you to rent it if you're able to, just with all of the housing needs. But yeah, I just wanted to ask, so thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thank you for that. Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, now we will turn to the appellant, and you have up to an additional 3 minutes to address the commission before I close the public hearing.
And Douglas still has his hand up, so I will allow him to speak, but we can also, Will, if you would like to speak, I will allow you to talk as well. And you have up to 3 minutes combined.
Okay, can we go back to page 40, which is the rear of the house? It shows a bank of windows looking toward our yard. And I know they say they've made this wonderful, so it's not going to look at us, but you saw the story poles. We can see them clearly from our yard. 40. And then if we can go to 41, I've marked what they can see from the back of that house. They can see all of that pink area. Now, if we can go to page 36. So here is their house. They've moved it forward. So obviously they didn't have setback problems. They have more space. They also have an extra large garage, so they could remove part of that garage. They can take out the patio and make that into house area. The backyard area could give them a few more 100 feet. Altogether, they could get 2,400 feet at least out of the house, plus their 955-foot basement would be 3,359 square feet. That should be plenty for them. They can do this as a one-story house. I'd like to concede the rest of my time to my son, Will.
I don't have too much else to add, but as I was saying, I appreciate the privacy measures that they have taken. I don't think that they're sufficient, personally. And another one of my concerns is that if this house is approved to be a two-story house, there's nothing preventing the rest of the neighborhood from building up and staring directly into our yard. Every day of my life since I've lived here, we have been in what I was always told was a one-story neighborhood. Every single surrounding house was one story tall. And when we had some construction going on that was unpermitted on the property next door to my father, which was a garage, the city intervened and forced them to block all the windows. And I kind of feel like that saved our privacy, and now we're at risk of losing it again. I don't have anything else to add. If my father wants to speak for the remainder of our time, I'd like to yield it to him.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I talked to some other neighbors. There are other neighbors that are unhappy about 2 stories going in this neighborhood. The one in the back I talked to next to number 4. She's actually on La Rinconada Drive, but she's right up against house number 4. She's vehemently against any 2-story houses. She believes that this house is way too massive for this area and that it's a problem. So this is going to change the whole neighborhood because this house is sticking out in the middle. So when you do another analysis of the design rules, you're going to find that the next house might qualify as a 2-story house under the design guidelines. I don't think that's appropriate. And these are small lots. This is a very small street. We should not be having 2-story houses on it. Thank you very much.
Ms. Armour, is that just to let us know that it was time? Okay. Thank you so much for your additional comments. And I would like to ask the commissioners if you would like to ask any questions of the appellant. And this is the last opportunity. Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, if this ends up being a 2-story development, is there anything that would make you feel comfortable with that? Because to add conditions of approval for frosted glass and the planting of mature trees.
So the trees that were added are only along our property line, but this house looks across the number 2 house backyard into our yard. And I know that the owners of that house, the Petersons, really wanted more trees. They haven't talked to any of these neighbors. They've made up whatever they wanted to do as far as privacy. I know Mrs. Peterson would want trees all along that property line because I've talked to her lots of times about trees, and she's concerned if I cut any branches or anything. They're great neighbors. They're wonderful people. We should, at the very minimum, have trees all along that property line, but I still don't think that's going to fix it. And my concern is also that this is going to be a major problem from looking at it from the front, and also for that whole little neighborhood in there. All those houses are going to be wanting to be 2 stories after this, and it's going to ruin that whole neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And let's see, Commissioner Janoff and then Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Mr. Maynard, have you communicated these concerns about additional trees to the property owner? And following up on Commissioner Clark's question, if this does become a 2-story home, are there any other requests that you would have of the property owner.
Yeah, I'd like to not have any windows looking back at our property. And I have not talked to him about the trees, but I did mention at the last community development hearing that the trees weren't going to be adequate and that our property line only covers a portion of the view. So they weren't considering that.
Thank you for that. And one last question. In your materials, you presented a term, an architectural term called brutalist architecture, which is a very specific term, and there are lots of examples. This doesn't.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I didn't hear everything.
In the materials presented by your party, by the appellant, the term brutalist architecture was used to describe the project plan. That's a very specific architectural term, which implies that there's a very blocky and windowless facade, and you're objecting to the brutalist architecture that you're describing the design as, and yet you're asking for windows to be removed. Can you tell me how that is consistent with what it appears to be a complaint against the brutalist architecture, and yet you're asking for more windows to be removed? How is that consistent? And is that really what you're asking for?
So yes, I totally understand what you're saying. Brutalist architecture is from the 1950s. I think it's terribly ugly. I guess it has some kind of a resurgence right now, but I don't think that should be visible from Wedgwood because it's awful. And that's what they're doing here. They have no windows on the one side, and they have only a very tiny window on the other side, making it look like a brutalist architecture.
Let me just interrupt you and ask you once more. If more windows are removed, won't that further exacerbate the brutalist architecture that you're concerned with?
So I'm asking that they remove any windows that look toward our house. So they have some of the windows may be blocked because they have a stairwell. So the one closest to Brown's Lane, at least, if I can look at my thing here, the one closest to Brown's Lane probably couldn't see us. And they could put frosted windows on there. They could put high windows that are frosted and not be looking right into our yard.
All right, thank you so much. You've answered my question.
All right, thank you for that, Commissioner Jana. And then Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Maynard, is there anything that the applicants can do other than build a one-story home that would satisfy your concerns about privacy?
Yes, they could build a 1.5-story home, if you want to call it that, like the one that's next door to them that everybody keeps saying is a 2-story house, where they build it with a 1-story roof line and build into the attic, sheetrock the attic, and make it into what might be called, I think it's referred to a couple of times in the residential design guidelines as a 1.5-story house with a room that has a window coming out of a dormer.
Okay, thank you for that. And does that answer your question, Commissioner Thomas? Back to Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I was just looking through the letters that they received, and it looks like there is one from the Petersons, and they did say that they'd love to see more trees, but they said that they look forward to hearing about the next steps in the city review and that it's beautiful. And so it just makes me wonder, with the other neighbors who you've referred to, how many neighbors have you actually directly talked to about this project who said they're opposed to it?
Well, here's the problem. I've been threatened with slander and libel for talking to people. So I've been careful about who I talk to and careful what I say. And I think if Mrs. Peterson knew that she had an option to talk about making it a 1-story house, she would be very much interested in that. And I don't know because I haven't asked her, but I think that she would. I also think from talking to the woman who lives next door, she filed a comment, Mrs. Thurio. I believe that the people in number 5 have the same feelings that she does, because she was talking to me about what her discussions were with them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and do any other commissioners have questions for the appellant before I close the public hearing? All right, seeing none, I'm closing the public hearing, and now I will turn to the commission and ask if any commissioners have questions for staff, would like to comment on this application, or well, I think it's probably premature to make a motion, but that will come during this time as well. Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. Just one initial question for staff. Which room has the window that the appellant is concerned about?
Thank you for that question. On the second story, let me pull up the plan. The windows that face the rear on the second story, there's 4 of them. 2 of them are in the primary bedroom. One of them is in another bedroom suite, and then the 4th is in a stairwell.
Okay, and under the conditions of approval, would all of those have frosted windows?
No, the conditions of approval required that the window on the left side elevation, which is above in a bathroom, so it's a higher window, that's the one that would need to be frosted.
Okay. And was that determined to be, what was the reasoning for that being the frosted window?
That because that's the window that directly faces the appellant's home, but the complication here is that the appellant shares the backyard with his son, which has the pool, which the rear windows sort of face that area.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas.
I don't know if staff will be able to answer this question, but do you know how far how many feet it is from that rear window that is of concern to the edge of the property where the property line that they share?
Thank you. It might take me a second, but I believe the applicant, provided an exhibit.
They did. I just wanted to confirm that that was.
It's tough.
But I don't. It's not that I don't trust that. I just didn't know if we.
It's tough to confirm it without a scaled plan. I can give you a rough number of the distance from those windows to the rear corner on a site plan. Something that came up earlier. It might take me a second.
It's okay.
Okay. So it looks like trying to drive 2 computers, sorry. It looks like it's the closest window on the second story to the back corner is about 80 feet plus or minus, knowing that they share about 20 feet of property line back there. So between 60 and 80 feet, depending on where you end the line.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And Commissioner Tawana and then Commissioner Chanoff.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick question for staff. I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear on this. This would not be the first 2-story home in the immediate neighborhood?
No, that's correct. The house immediately to the left is technically a 2-story residence. With the conversion of the attic, it qualifies as a story. And the house, 2 properties over to the right is clearly a 2-story residence.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Chanoff.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I don't have a question for staff yet. When we look at the read of the neighborhood, and this is to Commissioner Tavana's question perhaps, Brown Lane doesn't read like a street when you look at it. It really reads like it reads like a driveway or an alley. So it's pretty narrow. It doesn't really give you that separation that the residential design guideline is talking about when you're assessing a corner lot. And so with that in mind, I found it reasonable that we would consider the 2 homes to the right as part of the more traditional 225 analysis, And there are two-story homes to the right of the subject property. So I was comfortable that this wouldn't be setting a precedent, even though the house to the left is also considered a two-story. If it's technical, it looks like a one-story, it really reads like a one-story, but there are two stories there. So I found that to be reasonable in that this wouldn't be the first. I'm concerned that it's asking a lot. The property owner has done quite a bit to rearrange the top story to accommodate privacy issues. You've got an extraordinary number of feet in a setback, as Commissioner Thomas is asking, 60 to 80 feet, depending. And that's only looking at one small slice of the pool area from an angle. So it's kind of hard to imagine that this could get any. I mean, this is pretty well designed for respecting the privacy of those property owners. So I appreciate that. When I look at the lot itself and I look at the constraints that the lot has in terms of accommodating a one-story house, it's a big lot. So you've got some 10,000 square feet or so to work with after you take out all the easements. But if you're planning to keep the small structure as an ADU, which we definitely encourage, and then you'd have a really strangely configured one-story house sort of wrapping around, and you take that 1,200 square foot second story and try to put it down on the land, and you're really taking up an awful lot of usable backyard and nature, then you really need to. I also felt that given the size of this lot, the property owner has presented a very modest two-story home. It has a relatively high first-story floor plate, but the neighbors aren't talking about height as being an issue. So that could be someplace where we go, but I haven't heard that. Lastly, the windows in the larger bedroom, which are the two windows that are looking out at the pool area of the backyard. I mean, you need to have those windows for ingress, egress. You probably wouldn't want frosted windows in a bedroom. That doesn't make too much sense to me. I don't see, you could reduce it to one window, but I'm not sure that makes much difference. You still have visibility in that direction. So for me, I appreciate the Maynard's concerns about this becoming a more and more two-story neighborhood. We've seen that happen. It's within the rights of property owners to do this. I think that the property owner has been very respectful of the neighbors in designing this modest property. And at the moment, interested in hearing what my fellow commissioners have to say, but I am in support of this project as designed.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Janoff. And now we'll turn to Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I definitely agree with all of Commissioner Janoff's comments. And I will say I do not like the transition to two-story homes that's happening in these neighborhoods, but we have to look at each of them individually. And I think in the case of this project, it makes a lot of sense. I definitely do not think it would be realistic for them to turn this into a one-story home. I'm really, really glad to see them keeping all of the trees. And I think that's important. And then I certainly want to see the ADU maintained. And so I think it does just have to be two stories for that to work. And I think with that being said, that should mean that there's some level of compromise happening there. And I didn't really feel an effort from the appellant to try to find that common ground. And there were concerns in the report like freeway noise that weren't brought up. And it felt kind of like there was this desire to find problems with it. I think that the applicants did a really great job with neighborhood outreach, and I trust the results that they found. I think that if there was more neighborhood anger with this problem, we would have seen it here tonight. So I feel good about this project. I think that they did a really good job accommodating everyone as best they could and building a modestly sized home with large setbacks. So I'm in favor of the project.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Clark. And now Commissioner Thomas.
I just want to say that I also agree with what Chair Commissioner Janoff stated with regards to the project and what Commissioner Clark just mentioned also. I do think that the project was very well thought out. There are some constraints with regards to the property. It is a really large lot. I mean, it is a pretty large lot, and this is a modest size house for that lot, I think. I mean, we see a lot of, we're not seeing this because it's all of these requests and exceptions and blah, blah, blah. And so I think that it was designed and there were compromises made along the way to try and accommodate for the privacy situation. And the reality is that these people own this property and they have a right to build on that property. So I would not be comfortable with asking the applicant to change anything. I think that they have done a really great job, and I am in support of denying this. So I don't know if anyone else, I am interested to hear what other people have to say, that my fellow commissioners, but I feel pretty confident with that.
I will turn to Commissioner Tabana, and then I will comment as well. So, you lowered his hand. Oh no, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to agree with my fellow commissioners, and I agree, and I will. I don't think we should grant the appeal tonight.
Thank you for that. I think Commissioners Janoff, Thomas, and Clark all made very good comments, and I concur with that, as well as Commissioner Tabana. It's always difficult when you have a neighborhood that has one-story homes. But this one has already gone past being the first one-story home, and there are multiple one-story homes in this neighborhood, even though there are two-story homes, and so we can't be in a position of saying that they're changing the neighborhood, because they're not, because we already have two-story homes in this neighborhood. That being said, I also am very sympathetic to the fact that the applicant has some constraints with the property in terms of how they would go about doing that. And what's hard for a lot of people to understand in Los Gatos right now is that, California has a housing crisis. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to take a property and turn it into 2 housing units. And, it's the housing laws in California are very much in favor of making it very easy for people to create ADUs. And so this will be an opportunity to create an additional housing unit where we only had one. And I also wanted to note that the consulting architect's comments, we've seen in my many years on the Planning Commission, typically when the consulting architect feels that it's the bulk and mass, they'll defer to the commission, but he will generally comment that this house doesn't seem like, from his perspective, would fit into this neighborhood. And we didn't hear any of that from him. And for the changes that he did request from the applicant made every single one of them. And so I feel like the applicant has done everything that they can. And I did have just one question for staff, which was that the appellant had wondered about the size of the trees that would be planted, which was in the DRC approval.
Thank you. The DRC wasn't specific on the size of the trees, to my recollection. The Planning Commission, if they include it in their motion, can certainly revise that condition to specify a box size for the tree or multiple trees.
But you did specify fast growing, right?
That was what the motion was from the Development Review Committee. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, and that's probably equally as important from my point of view as the size of the tree, because, if it's slow growing, it might take 20 years, right? So very good. So I will turn it over to Commissioner Janoff and then Commissioner Thomas.
Just had a couple of other comments. I was curious what my fellow commissioners are thinking with regard to planting additional trees, not just along the common property line between Will Maynard and the applicant, but breaking that tree line a little deeper into the property to provide even more screening against Will Maynard's property, and privacy perhaps for the immediate neighbor. So that's question number one. Secondly, we received a desk item from a neighbor who is concerned about construction traffic on Browns Lane. And I didn't, as the resident commented, I too didn't find those restrictions on parking construction vehicles or materials on Browns Lane. So I'm curious, staff, whether that is a reasonable condition of approval to include, and do you have any knowledge about the discussion that that neighbor is referring to?
Thank you. The Development Review Committee didn't impose a condition specific to not using Browns Lane for construction staging and construction access. So that's something that the Planning Commission can certainly add as an additional condition. It's probably reasonable given the limited width of Browns Lane. I think it's about 10 feet. And given the adequate access along Wedgwood, it probably would not create undue hardship to the property owner while they're building. So that's something that could be included in the motion, and we would look for that in a construction staging plan during the review of the building permit.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Clark.
I have two comments. I do want to respond to Commissioner Janoff's mention about the trees, adding additional trees. I think that the way that the property is designed, right, are the proposed, not a lot of trees are being removed. There are trees in that neighborhood already and on this property. I think that the owner, the applicant, has made a lot of accommodations for privacy already. I think that it would be an unfair financial burden to ask them to continue to add more when they've made a lot of changes. But I'm open to being convinced otherwise, but I don't think that that's necessary at this point. And I also just want to say that with regards to this neighborhood, you know, when I saw it was on Wedgwood, this is a road in a neighborhood, although I do not personally live there, that I have spent a lot of time in that neighborhood and frequented this route like along to Montessorino and back a lot. And I would say that I had definitely do not consider it a one-story only neighborhood all along Wedgwood. I think the entire way there are many multi-story property like houses, and there have been, and it's an eclectic neighborhood. And so I did just want to mention also that I do think that it is reasonable for staff, for the town, and for us to consider this not like the only one story, you know, technically, but also with our own discretion.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner Janoff, for reminding us about both of those things. They had completely slipped my mind. So yeah, I think in terms of planting additional trees, I'm actually not sure how I feel about it. I do think that regardless, we should encourage them to consider it or something. I don't know that I would think that we should require it. I think Commissioner Thomas makes a really good point about the financial burden. So if they felt like they would want to do that to appease their neighbors more, then they could consider it. But yeah, I think maybe we shouldn't full force require it of them. And I definitely think that it would make sense to add some restrictions on construction on Brown Lane into the conditions of approval.
Thank you for that. Ms. Armour.
I just wanted to share with the commission if there is interest in having restrictions in regards to construction and vehicles and staging in Browns Lane, that condition of approval 66 is a construction management plan sheet, which is required to have details such as employee parking, construction staging areas, material storage areas, etc. And so additional language might be added to that existing condition 66 as a way of incorporating that restriction.
Okay, that's great. Before I go back to Commissioner Thomas, I just wanted to weigh in that I concur with what Commissioner Thomas and Commissioner Clark said. I would probably avoid putting more restrictions after the applicant has already made a lot of changes to their design. And I would hope, however, that any applicant would want to have good relations with the neighbors, but we didn't specifically hear from any neighbors that were requesting additional screening trees at any other place. So I would say that we could skip that. And I also agree that we should consider protecting construction traffic from the people on Browns Lane. It is a very small street, and we shouldn't want the construction people to assume that just because it's a small street, they can load it up. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question regarding condition of approval 65, because when I saw the desk item, I definitely agreed, Browns Lane is very small, and it does make sense that like people could get stuck in or out. It could be like a hazard or concerning, but I also I acknowledged that neighbor's concerns, but then I also know that this construction management plan is part of the condition of approval. So I do just want to ask the town staff if within that, is it reasonable for us as commissioners to assume that the town would not approve final plans or permits if there wasn't some, special considerations surrounding Browns Lane? Does that make sense? Like, I feel like they would have to do that. That would be a part of their construction management plan, or is it not reasonable for me to assume that?
Thank you for the question. I think the way I'd answer that is that in the conditions of approval that will ultimately ride this project through the building permit, there will be a restriction from blocking any street without getting an encroachment permit or special notice to the neighbors. So that would apply to Browns Lane. The Planning Commission can certainly further restrict access given the specific condition of Browns Lane, meaning it would be inconvenient if someone's leaving for school and a plumbing truck is taking its time pulling in, and Browns Lane's only 10 feet wide, so it's hard to get that truck in. So that's the special consideration the Planning Commission can give.
Okay, thank you. I personally do not feel like I am knowledgeable enough to put additional conditions on this with the plan. I would just hope that staff in the town, I do have confidence that staff in the town would be able to make a decision about that. And I would hope that we wouldn't have to put additional conditions of approval on this, but if anyone else feels like confident enough to do that, then I'm willing to hear about it.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. I am very willing to make that adjustment to condition of approval number 66. I think it's not fair to assume things are going to happen and hope things are going to happen. This is a very, very narrow lane. 10 feet wide is the width of a normal driveway, I think, or something along that line. So if any kind of car or equipment for any duration is in the way or material, it's going to be a problem for the people on Browns Lane. Personally, there's a lot of room on Wedgwood. I think that there's plenty of staging area, given those I'm not sure what they're called, bump outs that are by the golf course. So I think restricting Browns Lane is a good neighborly thing to do, and I feel comfortable to do that. In fact, I'm so comfortable that if the commission is ready, I'm ready to make a motion.
I think the commission is ready for you to make a motion.
All right. So we don't have the normal motion cheat sheet that we normally get from staff. So just working from the desk item number 2, the first page of the staff report, I move to deny the appeal of the Development Review Committee decision to approve the construction of a new single-family residence and site improvements requiring a grading permit on property zoned R18. Do I need to restate the property itself?
No.
All right, thank you. With the condition, a new condition, in addition to condition of approval number 66, where the construction management plan shall restrict vehicles, material, or traffic of the construction team and crew from using Browns Lane in any way. I think that's it.
Okay, in accordance with the plans
Yes, in
and
accordance with the plan
conditions.
provided by the applicant in exhibit.
3. Oh, and the conditions exhibit 3.
3, thank you. This is a real group effort.
That's fine. And a town attorney, do we also need to specifically grant approval or just deny the appeal?
Denying the appeal is sufficient.
Okay, thank you. So then I think your motion is complete. And do I have a second? I have Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Thomas. So I'll go with Commissioner Clark first.
Yeah, I'll second the motion. I'd like to ask that we add with the recommendation that the applicant consider planting more trees.
So would the maker of the motion agree to add a recommendation to the motion?
I would be comfortable adding that recommendation. It's not a requirement, but a recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So, so you've given your second, and we're adding a recommendation that the applicant consider planting more trees as appropriate. Okay, are there any other comments before I call the question? Okay, I don't see any hands up, so I will start with Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Tavana,
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. And that passes 5-0. And as we noted before, Vice Chair Barnett was recused from this item. And I'd like to ask staff if there's any appeal rights on this action by the Planning Commission.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The decision of the commission can be appealed to the town council by any interested person as defined by Town Code Section 2910-020 within 10 days and on forms available online with fees paid. Final deadline is 4 p.m. on the 10th day.
Thank you for that. Okay, so then we can move on to item 3 on our agenda. And item 3 is review and recommendation of the draft objective standards to the town council. And so just as a reminder from the commission, we'll have a staff report, but we did see this item previously and send it back for revisions based on comments that we had and comments from the public. So we're seeing the revised draft, and I will turn it over to staff to give us a staff report.
Thank you again. Before you tonight is the continued review of the draft objective standards for recommendation to the town council. On June 22nd, the Planning Commission reviewed the first draft document and provided input to staff on recommended modifications. Following that meeting, staff and our consultant M Group considered the direction from the Planning Commission and prepared a revised draft document. The revised draft objective standards continues to be organized into 2 sections, site standards and building design. The revised draft includes a new key terms section providing definitions for terms used in the document. Many of the objective standards have been updated and several new standards have been added, and diagrams throughout the document have also been updated. In addition to the revised document, staff prepared a red line document showing all of the changes made to the previous draft. Staff also prepared a summary of the revisions made and responses to comments received from the public and the Planning Commission. These documents are included as exhibits to your staff report this evening. An addendum and desk item have been distributed, including input from planning commissioners and additional public comment received after publishing of the staff report. Staff, along with our consultant, look forward to the discussion this evening and are available to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. And just to recap, we did get comments in both the addendum and desk item from Vice Chair Barnett. And we also got comments from Ms. Quintana. So I'd like to ask if any commissioners have questions for staff. Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I actually just want to set the stage thanking staff. I had my original packet with all my notes alongside the new standards when I was reviewing it, and it was incredible how well all of it was reflected in the new standards. So thank you for all of your hard work.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for staff from commissioners? Okay. And then let's see, I think we should go ahead and take public comments. And then we can have our commission discussion about whether or not it's good enough to recommend to go forward. So I'd like to see if any members of the public would like to speak on the draft objective standards. And you have up to 3 minutes. And if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand.
And Chair, it does look like we've got at least a couple of people who would like to speak. So we're going to start with Rob Moore. Allow him to speak. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Hansen and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Rob Moore, and I am speaking purely in a personal capacity tonight. I'm here to voice my support for the objective standards and thank both the Commission and staff for working so hard to put these together. I feel that these objective standards will do a lot to streamline the planning process while ensuring high quality projects. I've actually been talking with hundreds of folks throughout the town every week, and whenever they bring up concerns about the building process, I tell them that this document is in the works. It may be hard to believe this, but without fail, this prospect of objective standards is incredibly exciting to them. And these objective standards are exciting to me as well. So thank you all for your service to the town, and have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you for that, Mr. Moore. And do any commissioners have questions for Mr. Moore? I don't see any. All right. And then it looks like we have another hand up as well.
Yes, I will allow Bess to speak. Go ahead. You have up to 3 minutes.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Bess Worsema, Studio 3 Design. I know several of you from many years past, and some of you are new. Welcome to the commission, I guess. I know it's a big job. I'm here tonight to represent your local architects. We have reviewed the document and met on the side to help try to figure out how to support the town best in streamlining the process for permitting, but also allow for design guidelines and objective standards that actually would provide a positive built environment for the town. This group of architects includes Gary Colsat, Louis Liu, Tom Sloan, Jay Plett, Noel Cross, Terry Martin, Bob Fleury, Jennifer Kreshner, and Tony Jeans. We're all people you have probably seen projects from before and can recognize both single family and multifamily around town. We do have concerns about what we see in the draft documents that are relatively significant, and we respectfully request that this be continued, and that you lean on your local architects and designers to help define details that are applicable to the town and community that we all love, work in, and service. We feel that this document creates a rule of thumb that can be used by everyone for essentially design by numbers, like paint by numbers, which means you end up with a picture that looks exactly like what the diagram defines. We're also very concerned that several of the items within each of the categories are not relative to actually a positive town built environment, as well as reflect local standards for other communities that are similar in size and scale to ours. We're concerned that the diagrams shown in this become reality, and they are limiting in terms of form and proportion. We respect the fact that you're trying to streamline the process by objectifying subjective and design standards. However, that's not the definition of design. And I'm sure you all know that, and that's part of what you review constantly on all types of projects. Trying to objectify guidelines and subjective rules is ultimately the definition of something that I think, I know everyone wants to do, because we're trying to make it easier for people to understand what to design to get past, make it easier for you to support or not support a proposal. And we respectfully request that you respect the fact that there are items that are already part of the permit process that we all step through from a design capacity. We have peer reviews, Larry Cannon, et cetera. And we have to take public comment on projects, just as you witnessed before, and a robust conversation around them. Many of the architectural features suggested only reflect traditional detailing in architecture. How will more modern elements be classified, and who judges if a proposed element meets its definition? The danger being that only traditional architecture will meet these qualifications, and that is not necessarily relevant for multifamily. According to item number 4.6B, 60% of building facade facing a street has to have fenestration. In some instances, a contrast of solid versus open, i.e. fenestration.
Ms. Worsma, Ms. Armour has her hand up. I believe that your
Sorry.
3 minutes are up. However,
Okay, I guess my just final thing would be we're willing to be available to answer questions and have gone through and taken each section, categorized it, and have some concerns or options we'd be willing to share.
thank you for that. I can ask if any commissioners have questions for you at this time. Commissioner Clark.
Thank you so much for being here. I know that you very well may not have an answer to this question, but I think that creating objective standards, as you've pointed out, is really tricky because you want to be encouraging creativity while also ensuring consistency and everything. And so I was just wondering if you know of any examples of objective standards that you think do a better job at addressing some of your concerns.
Specific objective standards in multifamily or single family residential, or
yeah, like any other cities or anything like that?
Yes, I know, like for instance, Gary Colsat has done an analysis, and for instance, in the standards that you guys are trying to put, individual recreation area requirements are much larger than most typical condo and apartments built locally. 120 square feet of outdoor area per unit is not consistent with our neighboring townships and cities, and much larger. That's just one example of many. I think what we have a grave concern about as architects and designers is that attached diagrams and quantification based on a point system is really only going to create a design by numbers, and who and how determines what those points are and what qualifies as those.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes, can you provide an estimate of when the architect could provide some written input to the commission along the lines that you're talking about to provide all that information for our consideration?
Sure. I'm happy to go back to the group. I was nominated to represent everyone tonight because people had different things with back to school. But I'm happy to collectively put everyone on a group email to Sean and Ryan and Jennifer and figure out what might work for you guys from a timing perspective, as well as us. We lamented in our most recent get together that, the special meetings and the research sessions that occur, often occur during the middle of the day, with a lot of us not being able to step away from clients and the work that we do in order to accommodate that. So maybe we could also put some time suggestions together to present something in a capacity that is useful to you.
I think you answered the question. And so we would definitely encourage you to, as quickly as possible, because this effort has been going on for over a year now.
No, we understand. We understand. In the background, and just as a reminder, we are the ones who actually have to deal with implementing this and dealing with it alongside continuing to run our businesses so that we can support the town. So we understand it's been going on. We also we've been dealing with a shifting and changing building department and process and procedure for everything. And, we appreciate your consideration of everything that we step through as local business owners as well, from a timing and efficiency standpoint. We also have a concern that perhaps these multifamily ones are going to trickle down into single family rules of thumb in terms of objectifying subjective guidelines.
Yes, but so now you're not answering my question and you're continuing to comment. So I'm sorry, but we do have to limit everyone to 3 minutes. So we appreciate that, and we do encourage you to provide additional comments in writing. Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak on this item? It looks like there's one more hand up.
Yes, we have interest from Lee Quintana. I'm going to need to promote her to panelist because of the system she is on. Just a moment. All right, Lee, you should be able to speak.
Okay. I would encourage you to consider meeting with the architects of the town. I think objective standards are a good way to speed up processing of projects, but I think that the standards have to be easily understood by everybody who sees them. And I would agree with Bess that the illustrations in these objective standards do tend to make one think that all these buildings are going to be absolutely symmetrical and absolutely square and triangle and all face the street, and that's going to be pretty damn boring. But I do think we need the objective standards, but I'd also like staff to explain what these particular standards apply to and why they're being developed. Because it's my understanding they will only apply to very specific projects, not every project. So I think that's one of the failings of the introduction, is it's really not clear what they apply to.
Okay. Did you have any other additional comments you wanted to make at this time?
No, they're all, at this time, they're all in my comments that I submitted.
Yes, and we thank you for that as well, as always, for submitting a lot of additional comments and things for us to consider. I'd like to ask if any commissioners have questions for you. Okay, I don't see any other hands up, so thank you for that. And I will see if there's anyone else that would like to speak in public comments.
So if anyone else would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand. Not seeing any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, so then I'm going to close public comments on this item, and we'll turn to the commission to have a discussion. I do think that I wanted to, since Vice Chair Barnett submitted 2 different comments. Oh, I'm sorry, but our town attorney has a comment as well. Let me go to her first.
If the commission would like, I could address the question from the public as to why the objective design standards are necessary. It's a requirement of, as the commission probably knows, it's a requirement of Senate Bill 35, and it requires cities to establish objective design standards for multifamily residential development. And so the second part of the question was, who would this apply to? And it would apply to multifamily residential development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Go ahead, Commissioner Thomas.
I just had a quick follow-up question about that. When we're talking about multifamily, specifically, is that going to be anything larger than 1 unit? No, right? It's larger than.
So the State Housing and Community Development Department defines it as 2 or more.
Okay.
I think there's a nuance in the town's code, so we're defining it to mean 3 or more.
3. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was 3 or 4. Okay. So it is anything that is 3 or more. So not a duplex, but a triplex. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Are there any more questions up front? Okay. So then I wanted to just, in terms of Vice Chair Brennan, you submitted a comment regarding the Palo Alto objective standards, and you had subparts 1, 2, and 3 that you wanted to discuss. So what are you hoping to to do with the objective standards regarding this? Add things from Palo Alto, or maybe who could help us with?
Yeah, I think that the Palo Alto, actually it's a code section, the municipal code has very good objective standards that relate to the privacy of neighbors with respect to the use of balconies in adjacent multifamily buildings. And you saw what they were from the input I gave, and it would be my recommendation that we include that as part of our final approval of the objective standards.
Right, because at this point in time, we don't have a specific section on privacy, although there might be things that in the standards that could address some privacy. So your recommendation would be to include language similar to that.
There's some language about protecting privacy, but it's not specific in terms of the view angle and the height of the balcony enclosure.
Okay, it looks like there's some commissioners that have comments or questions. Commissioner Janoff and then Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah, I just was going to point out that Commissioner Vice Chair Barnett's recommendations on balconies sort of does a deep dive in a way that the other components of the document don't do. And we talked last time or time before about not wanting to go into that much detail. I'm not against including balconies or some objective standards regarding balconies, but I'm concerned about an objective standard around privacy. I mean, the item 2 on our agenda tonight was all about privacy. We don't have objective standards regarding that. So I'd be curious to hear from staff or even the town attorney, you know, because privacy isn't just a balcony issue. If we go to balcony, then why wouldn't we go broader? And if we go broader, we're going to get into trouble. So I'm just curious what staff would have to say about privacy, because this, if we can, and would those objective standards lead us to objective standards for residential projects and that sort of thing?
So thank you. Specific to the balconies issue, what staff can offer here is we certainly looked at this specific section from Palo Alto following the direction of the Planning Commission at the last meeting. We looked at this, we recognized the level of detail that their objective standards, which are incorporated in their municipal code, that they go to here, and also heard from the Planning Commission, to Commissioner Janoff's point, that wasn't the level of detail that perhaps our document wanted to go to. The other piece here is depending on how you read things and depending on future development, you can inadvertently restrict development on future development on neighboring properties by forcing, by having objective standards like this and providing an example of a multifamily unit or development going in on one property next to a residential property, but once that's built, the residential property wants to redevelop in the future to a different residence. All of a sudden, you can create a conflict with privacy based on these objective standards. Given all that, and there was long discussions with the consultant and with staff, we tried to simplify it down to try to preserve future development rights and to create some privacy breaks. Regarding balconies, sorry.
Thank you for that. And is there to my broader question of balcony is one component of privacy, as we heard tonight, windows are another, for example. How would we or could we, or does the commission want to go to privacy standards?
Windows could certainly be regulated in a similar fashion to the way that Palo Alto is approaching their balconies. Whether the commission wants to do that remains to be seen.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Janoff. And let's see, Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Clark. Oh, wait, hold on. Ms. Armour has her hand up. So.
Sorry, I believe that Mr. Safdie had an additional thought to add to that discussion.
I'm sorry, I completely missed your hand up. So,
no,
go ahead.
It's okay. Thank you. I was just going to interject. It did seem like there was a little bit of confusion about whether or not we did include that. We do have some privacy standards in 4.11 under subsection B. But to echo what Mr. Mullen said, it was a little bit of a struggle. So we did bring that more as a request to the commissioners and see which direction you wanted to go. And the reason we didn't decide to tackle windows is there are certain requirements on size of windows for different rooms in a house. So we didn't want to overly restrict the development. But again, any comments we're happy to receive. So please let us know.
Okay, thank you for that, for the clarification. I mean, because it has been a long process from starting from when we had the subcommittee last summer in the fall. And we went through every objective standard in the town. And so that if things aren't in there, we probably discussed it and came up with a reason why that we might not want to do that. But let's go on and hear what the other commissioners have to say. Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Clark.
I hesitate to add much more about privacy specifically because I do think that it has the possibility of restricting design elements and or some types of projects. And as we know, it's hard to get these big projects done as it is. And I think that particularly in areas that we're looking to build a lot of these multi-family, like we're hoping that the town gets some redevelopment in these areas. It doesn't seem like right now we really need to be restricting things with regards to specifics about windows or more specific things about balconies. My other question for the town attorney is if we do not when is our deadline really for getting these objective standards passed, like, approved by the town council, according to SB 35? Is there like a point at which we get fined, we get in trouble, we get told these are our standards now?
If I remember correctly, the deadline was January of this past year. So I do think we're past the deadline.
Okay.
And in terms of penalties, I think it will be difficult if we get an SB 35 planning application that asks to see the town's objective standards, because the town will need to demonstrate that a proposed project does not comply with its objective standards.
So the longer we drag this out, we really risk, like, if we don't have objective standards, then we really risk like projects being able to decide, have local control about project approval. Because if we don't have the standards and they go through the SB 35 route and we have nothing to show them, we essentially have to approve the project gets approved.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. All right. And Director Paulson, you had your camera on, but I guess you're not. Okay. So I'll go to Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Tabana.
Thank you. I also am hesitant to put further restrictions on privacy. And I mean, even in the staff report, one of their concerns is the requirement for private recreation space while simultaneously requiring more privacy. And so I think already it's becoming a problem when we're focusing it in too many different areas. And I do think once we get specific about balconies and windows, then we have to get specific about other things related to privacy. And then once we get specific about privacy, do we have to go more specific with the rest of our plan? Because the Palo Alto standards are a lot more specific, and I think that makes them more restrictive, which is not the goal here. I think that in general, we understand that these are supposed to allow development while making sure that they fit with the town. And so I think that it probably isn't a good idea to get more specific about these sorts of things.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Clark. Commissioner Tabana.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to echo Commissioner Clark's statements about privacy. I do think privacy is inherently subjective. What is private to one person could be acceptable to the next. So any language regarding this topic, I do think should be general. Lastly, Bess, I think, made a number of compelling comments, and I would like to see a comprehensive list of suggestions Although I don't know why it hasn't happened yet, but I wouldn't feel comfortable making a recommendation to town council until I hear their complete comments.
Before I go to any other commissioners, I thought, and so I'm asked, this is a question for staff, and our consultant is here. I thought that engaging with architects was part of the process.
Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. Feel free to chime in, Mr. Mullen, if I missed anything, but throughout the process, we do have the list of architects on our email blast. So anytime there were community meetings or drafts of the document available, we were sending that out and strongly encouraging input. So, and we do look forward to seeing these comments from the architects.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, okay, then I will go to Commissioner Janoff, Commissioner Clark, and then Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah. So here's a conundrum. You know, we always want to hear from the experts because we aren't the experts when it comes to comparing what we know to this group of amazing, talented architects. Having said that, if we don't have the input and we don't have much time, or we're out of time, I'm usually in favor of pressing on with meeting an objective. We've had quite a bit of time to do that. But on the other hand, I'm also in favor of hearing directly from the architects. And we got just a little tidbit of what they have to say. So here's my question for staff. I could see myself going either way. I would feel comfortable approving what we have tonight with some changes that we are no doubt going to discuss, with the understanding that architects can come in and provide comments and we can make an amendment, we can make a change. So the question for staff is it more prudent to get this thing through and then make changes, or vice versa? I mean, if the architects are as concerned about some of the language, and I heard more concern about the visuals than the language, and I have another question for staff after this question, but you know, what do you recommend? Do you recommend that we go forward with approving something so there is some objective standards in place when an SB project, 35 project comes to us or comes to the town, or do you recommend we wait?
I can weigh in very briefly, and then I would defer to the town attorney on whether it's best to get something approved and then amend it later. I think there's tremendous value in receiving input from the local architect community, and so much so that that's why we've reached out to them and appreciate that they've gotten together and will be providing us some information. I suspect that with the Planning Commission's direction, once that information is understood, that there could be some significant changes to the document. So there's the two paths that you're looking at. It's not having something on the books for SB 35, but putting something on the books that's going to be changed or could prospectively be changed pretty significantly in the future. And then,
yeah, and personally, I wouldn't want to put something out that's going to look pretty different if we have an amendment. So if the architects can come together and provide us feedback within the next week, then I would say continuing. I'd be in favor of continuing this to the next Planning Commission meeting so that we have the benefit of that information. One thing I would say is the diagrams that we have are a marked improvement over the first draft that we looked at. So I think we're heading in the right direction. But my question for staff is, would there be any downside to including actual images like the 3 examples that you gave at the end of the staff report? Were really a great opportunity to say, oh, okay, this is how the evaluation would work. This is how the points would add up. And those are real examples in town. They look different, and they really provide kind of a range of architectural styles that, so my question is, like the residential design guideline, for instance, where we have actual images of properties within town, can we do something similar so that we assuage the concern of the architects that, because this stuff really does look like brutalist architecture if you go that direction, right? So I appreciate that concern. And if we can put more actual graphics in, I think that would make a huge difference in speaking to the range of architectural style that would be welcome in the town.
We certainly could include images, and that was a point that was discussed in great detail with our consultant. The caution that we received from our consultant that I personally agree with is that putting an image out there to demonstrate our facade articulation could have the unintended consequence of including something else that violates an objective standard further down the document. And that's just inherent with putting a real world picture in. And because of that complication, we chose to move the diagrams from what you saw at the last meeting in June to what you see now, which is closer to the Palo Alto, which is sort of being the case study that's being held up here, and try to have a more controlled environment to articulate the point. But if it is the will of the Planning Commission, we could certainly start to work on sourcing images and taking photos to demonstrate these points.
All right, thank you.
Let's see what others think. Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. First, I'll touch on the photos. I agree that I had thought it would be good to see some photos in there. I think that Mr. Mullen makes a very good point. I think I have a couple of thoughts on it. One is that I would hope there are projects out there that don't break any of the rules, since theoretically we're trying to bring these into existence. So I think it would be worth looking. And if you are able to find some and confirm that they fully conform, I do think that those would be great to see in there. And if that's not possible, I think creating some more nuanced versions, just showing something and saying which of the ones it incorporates and how many points it gets, and showing that it can be asymmetrical and look a little different and things like that. I think at least having something of that sort in there would be worth it. And I'm torn about what to do with the situation with the architects. I think that their input is really important, and it sounds like they're going to be putting something together, and I don't see a world in which we receive that and just dismiss it. And I do think that it sounded like there would be some significant changes. And so it's really, really unfortunate that the timing happened this way and that this wasn't brought to our attention sooner. But I don't feel like it is worth having a really deep conversation and making a lot of changes if they might end up not feeling realistic to the people who are going to be tasked with implementing them.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. Commissioner Thomas.
I have multiple comments. And first, I would like to comment on the visuals. I know that the visuals seem sterile, but I see that as more of an I know that I am not an architect, but I see it as more of an opportunity. And I really do feel like the visuals are really great, a great improvement. And I do feel like in a lot of ways, less is more. I think that our residential design guidelines have photos of real houses because residents read those. Not that residents aren't going to be looking at these draft objective standards, but the reality is that these are for multifamily units. These are going to be professionals that are looking at these standards and interpreting them. So for me, I would hope that as an architect, if you looked at this, you would see this more as a blank slate that you can work with rather than being restricted. I totally appreciate that the architects have concerns, and I do think that it's unfortunate that we're hearing about them tonight at this meeting when we're so far beyond the deadline. However, I would hope that we could just get some very specific points about what exactly is very restrictive and perhaps might result in too much of a cookie cutter like development. I see that Ms. Armour had her hand up. Do you want to say something before I keep going?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Ms. Armour, and then we'll let Commissioner Thomas finish.
Sorry, Commissioner, I did not intend to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure as we do continue with this discussion and consideration as to whether to try and make a recommendation tonight, or continue for further discussion at another time. To remember that as with any recommendation from the Planning Commission, we will continue to receive public comments through the process as it goes to Town Council for their consideration. So while the recommendation of the Planning Commission, we want it to be as complete as possible, there still will be that additional time after this discussion tonight.
Perfect. Thank you for that reminder, because that was one of my other comments that I wanted to bring up, that I personally am interested to hear what other commissioners think about making any, minor recommended changes, but overall, hopefully getting to a place tonight where we can forward this to the Town Council for recommendation, and just really hope and encourage that those architects get their public comments in over the next week, and or put it in. It will be, if we make the recommendation, Town Council will know that we feel very strongly that we should be receiving feedback from the architects and taking that into consideration. So I just want to know, do any of us feel comfortable forwarding for approval, but then telling Town Council that we should really, we strongly encourage them to consider any further comments from professionals that they receive. And then my last comment and concern is regard to this is just, again, unfortunate that we're just hearing some of these concerns tonight, but I did also hear that a concern is that these objective standards might trickle down into single family standards. And I just wanted to confirm with staff that is not the case. And that is not my interpretation of this situation whatsoever. So
I can take the first stab at this. Thank you for the question. You are correct. These objective standards, per direction from the state, they are applicable only to these qualifying projects defined as the multifamily and mixed use. If at a certain time in the future there's direction to do this for single family, I'm assuming there will be with these subcommittee meetings and community meetings to get input. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Steph. And I would also say that if you look at the direction of state law that has been coming, that it's not at all focused on single family, because what they're trying to encourage is multifamily. So that's the best way to get more housing. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Thomas.
I'm sorry, I just want to add one more thing related to all that. And that is that I just really think that as a town, and I know with a lot of the work that we're doing, the more towns that get behind on putting up objective standards for things and fall behind on all of this, the more it just is encouraging Sacramento to really just come in and put more and more restrictions on local control. And I know that having local control and being able to hold local power and decision making of what our town character looks like is something that's really important to our residents here in town. And I just want to say that I really don't want to be responsible for furthering any hard restrictions coming from Sacramento that really take away a lot of our local power. And so that is just a concern of mine if we continue to continue this.
All right. Thank you for that. There's several people with their hands up. Let's go to Vice Chair Barnett, then Commissioner Clark, and then Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you, Chair. I shared the dismay of my fellow commissioners about the delay from the professionals in the community to provide input during our process. However, we received a number of specific topics from the public about the speaker, about specific comments about design characteristics and objective standards that they don't think are practical in real life. And so I would be in favor of some delay. I wish we had a better sense of how long it would realistically take the architects and engineers to provide us that feedback. but I would be certainly comfortable with 1 week. As to the photos, my recollection, I may be wrong, but my recollection is that in the process of developing the objective standards, we did see some photographs that were prepared by the consultant. I thought they were very helpful, and they're certainly helpful in the residential design guidelines. So I would encourage that change in the objective standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Jana.
Thank you. I want to address two things. So first is on the images. There, as we've said, definitely an upgrade from what we saw before. And I just think from what we've heard from the public tonight, it sounds like when members of the public do go look at the document, it doesn't really make them feel like the standards are going to allow for variety. And it sounds like it's still kind of hard for them to picture what they look like in real life. And I personally, when I've been talking to people about the ministerial process and addressing their concerns on it, I talk about the objective standards. And so I do think that people are going to go look at them to see what actually happens when a development is going through this process. And I think it's important to consider what a lay person might think when they see the document. So I think having something a little more real world in there, it would be worth it, in my opinion. And then second, I agree with Vice Chair Barnett that my preference would be to defer this to some degree. I just think that it sounded like the architects have some serious concerns. And I think that the Planning Commission's role is to really look closely at these standards before sending them over to the town council, and that we're a trusted source. And so I'd want to make sure that we've looked at them in a similar form to how they'll be seen at the council.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Jana.
Thank you. If we had any assurance that what we were looking at in draft form was, 90% close according to the architects, then maybe I'd be comfortable forwarding it to town council and then letting them do the remaining work. But I'm not generally in favor of having the council do the Planning Commission's work. And so I really think it's important, given the, we didn't see Bess's face, but you certainly heard a certain urgency. I think we should give them the opportunity to provide input. We need to give them a very short deadline so that they understand that we can't keep delaying this. If we have SB 35 projects in the pipeline, and staff can confirm whether we do or we don't, if we don't today, we probably won't in 2 weeks. And if we can get this draft in better shape, I think we owe it to town council to have done, to at least done the invite to the architects, give them a hard deadline, get that input, and be prepared to discuss it next week. So I'm in favor of continuing for that. A couple other comments. When we talk about images, I think it's important to keep the line drawings in there. It does give, as Commissioner Thomas indicated, it gives you kind of a, it doesn't tell you much. It just says this is the basic. And that's a good thing for creativity. But if we have a bunch of examples of good architectural design that incorporate these kind of standards, even if the captions say, this is showing good articulation, this is showing good roof, whatever you want the person to be looking at, and it doesn't have to be in town. If it is, it's great, but it could be within the wider community, or even further afield if we want to have really quality architectural images in the standards. So I think that's a really good idea. Last point, I think that the comments from Lee Quintana are important in the introductory area. While I thought her recommended changes for specifically talking about the government code and what it intended to cover were good, I think if we frame the introduction specifically citing SB 35 and what it covers or what its expectations are, then we have a much stronger introduction about why this is happening and why it's important. And if that includes the government code, great, include that too. I don't think there's any harm in making the introduction, nicely comprehensive. But I would be in favor of a short continuance. And again, for staff, if we've got projects that are SB 35 projects in the pipeline, let us know whether we're really flirting with any real possibility that we're going to have some problems if we delay.
So I'm going to ask Commissioner Thomas to hold on and let Director Paulson speak, and then I have something I wanted to say as well. So.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. I think what I also heard from Ms. Worsama was, getting something quickly is probably not going to be realistic. So just so the commission is prepared, I think at a minimum, we would have to continue it to the second meeting in September. And so I think that hopefully will give staff time, because I think what would be important in that exercise is for staff to meet with the architects group as well. So we can walk through stuff together rather than the back and forth of, email or attachment communication. So I think that would be important. I think we've talked about the illustrations, photos throughout a number of different processes, and they're always challenging. But I think we can definitely look into that piece as well. For the this is a little broader than just SB 35, but also SB 330, Housing Accountability Act. Those all have specific references to objective standards. So we don't have any projects currently for any of those. The couple Housing Accountability Act projects you did see were North 40 utilized that for the first phase, and then the mixed use project on Union across from Safeway, where they had the single family detached and then they had a mixed use with 3 condos above. So they utilized that. They were willing to make some changes. I think specifically for the Union, there were some things that they were willing to do, but they weren't willing to do all the things that were more of a subjective nature. But I think it's just important to keep that big picture of what we're really talking about. We're definitely not going down to single family or duplexes. We've had that conversation as well. That if that's something that ultimately the town's interested in, that would be a completely separate standalone document for those 2 product types. But I think just want to make sure that we have realistic expectations, both for the architects group as well as the commission, of to really have a conversation with them, have them pull together their stuff so that the commission can have it as well. I think is going to be a little more than a week. I'm not sure that's realistic, and I don't want to speak for the architects group, but I'm fairly confident they would potentially agree.
So a question for staff. I mean, the Ms. Worsama has had her hand up for a while, but I did close the public hearing. So, I mean, is it possible that I could reopen the public hearing, public comments, and just get that input?
But it should be for a very specific question, kind of a yes/no type question.
Okay.
If you were to reopen, it should be very specific.
Okay, well, so
town attorney could.
So I'm just going to make a comment, and then I'd like to hear back from staff as well. I'm not comfortable with sending this off to town council, but on the other hand, I'm extremely concerned to hear that we are this many months behind. So it has to be, if we're going to continue it, it needs to be a fairly short time frame. And we have to remember, and some of the comments I heard from Ms. Worsama were around creativity and design and all that stuff. And these are supposed to be objective standards. And I don't think that there's anything that's unclear at all about articulation and things like that, the concepts that are presented in these documents. So any changes that get to be made, it can't be, we want to have freedom to do whatever we want. It has to be objective standards, and we need to give enough detail so that anyone, including people that doesn't have a lot of experience working with the town, can look at those things and say, yes, I know how to incorporate those. So, so I guess I'm trying to figure out how we can determine what is an appropriate amount of time. I mean, because the other side of this is that if we are this far past January, a few more weeks might not matter. So staff, give me some guidance here.
Thank you. I think looking at the comments or prospective comments from the architect community, as stated before, I think there could be some significant changes. We would be looking for the most specific comment that we could get from them on existing standards, concerns on existing standards, and any recommendations for additional standards. from a turnaround standpoint, from a staff's perspective, we wouldn't be making any changes before we came back to the planning commission. I don't believe we would. I think we would collect their input and bring it to the planning commission for discussion, and could possibly provide responses as we've done before. I can defer to Joel and Jennifer on that as well.
Go ahead, Director Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Yeah, I think, again, another option is we continue it to the first meeting in September, but if we don't have the input from the architects because they haven't been able to pull that together, then, we can continue it again. So I think that would be a discussion for the commission, whether or not the chair is interested in opening up the public hearing for a very specific question, such as, do you think the architects group is going to be able to come up with their recommendations in, by next Thursday, so that we can get it into the packet for the meeting on the 14th. Or 2 weeks, because I think the packet goes out, Ms. Armour, the 9th?
That's correct.
Yeah.
We do
So-
have 3 weeks until the next meeting.
Yeah. So
Okay.
whether or not.
And I also heard an offer from staff to meet with these architects versus them having to send comments back and forth to each other. So, which that to me sounds much more expedient, because you could take notes on what sounds reasonable in a meeting versus sending things and then having to review them and sending them back. Okay. Before I do that, I'm going to, because Commissioner Thomas and Commissioner Janoff had their hands up, I'm going to ask them for their input, and then we'll go from there. Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say that I also support Ms. Quintana's comments regarding the intro. I do think that it's important to be very specific because it's called purpose. And I think that being very explicit and assuming people don't know what the purpose of this document is before they look at it is important. My comment regarding the photos would be maybe if we didn't want, I do appreciate how straightforward and simple this is compared to our residential design guidelines. I do think it's quick and easy to look at and easy to interpret. And so I understand how looking at photos, I appreciate Commissioner Clark's comments about how people might be looking at this, lay people are going to look at this. So we should include some examples. So I'm just interested in hearing, are people thinking that those photos should be integrated throughout, or more used as an index, to reference as examples at the end? So that's one thing. And then I did have I have a couple of comments and questions regarding just objective standards and SB 35. I kind of got the impression from the architect's comments tonight that objective standards in general are restrictive with regards to design and architecture. And like we said, Director Paulson just said, no objective, just not having objective standards isn't an option at this point. We have to have them. So I just am curious if we know also this group of architects, do we know what kind of projects they're doing? Because I think the projects that are going to come through SB 35 and through this ministerial process are going to be, even though it's classified in town code as 2 or more, I would assume that it's going to be larger developments and redevelopments. So my question for staff and or the town attorney is, just because this SB 35 objective standards pathway exists, can smaller projects still go through the typical town process in a different way and not have to deal with this point system with regards to objective standards and just meet our other residential design guidelines that exist, or is this now going to be the only pathway for development of 2 or more?
I can start. So for SB 35, a project has to invoke it in order to rely on it. However, as the director mentioned, there's also the State Housing Accountability Act, and that provides that cities and towns can only deny multi-unit housing if they can demonstrate that the project doesn't comply with an objective standard. And so it's also a benefit to cities and towns to have objective standards in place to consider any multifamily housing project.
And I would add that smaller projects, to Commissioner's question, the existing process would remain. They could choose to not go through the objective standards process, which is a streamlined process, and choose for whatever reason to go through the typical existing architecture and site process.
Okay, so just to confirm, say, my mom lives in a current 2-story home. It's big. If she wanted to go through and, well, I guess she doesn't, I don't know. Basically, like if you want to develop a lot right now and you want to build a smaller, just like 4-plex on that lot that, it fits with the design. We've looked at all the, the neighborhood, like it doesn't even look like a 4-plex. It looks like a normal single family home. There is a pathway to still do that through the typical architecture and site application that exists right now. I just want to confirm that.
Correct.
That
Those
is correct.
those existing processes will still be in place for all size projects. It's really just when they're invoking this special streamlined process that we would then impose these, require that they comply with these objective standards.
Okay, thank you. And then, so my understanding, and please tell me if this is not a good interpretation, is that SB 35 is mainly going to be used for larger projects that are, invested with large companies, large developers, contractors, big architecture firms, all of that, most of the time in our situation. If that is the case, then I am more comfortable just proceeding on, because we still have this other pathway that exists. If our local architects feel like these objective standards are restrictive. But I am really curious to hear what other commissioners think about that.
Okay, Commissioner Chandler.
Well, I wouldn't mind responding to Commissioner Thomas, but I think we've got a question at hand that really needs to be answered. And that is, yes, I agree. We should open the meeting open the public meeting back up to ask the architect, Bess Versma, since she's the named representative for the architects, whether they can compile the comments of the architects within the next 2 weeks.
Okay, that's great. That was my thinking as well. I think a week is too fast. And if it meant that we had to we couldn't go meet at the next meeting, then so be it.
Yeah.
But if others feel differently about that, before I ask Ms. Wortsma, Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll have something after that, but I also think that question needs to be answered first. I think it's important that the architects are able to meet with staff. So I also want to make sure that that's incorporated into the timeline.
Okay. So then I'm going to go reopen the public comments section, and I'm going to ask Ms. Wortsma a question.
All right.
Okay.
She should be able to speak once you've asked the question.
Okay. So my question is this: can you either send comments or meet with staff within the next 2 weeks to help advance this objective standards project forward, because we are in such a tight time frame?
I will make sure that we meet with staff and we provide you with comments in 2 weeks. 100%. We care. We want to help, and we want to be sure that this is a successful process for what Los Gatos wants to see in terms of its built environment. I would say that I want to make sure that my 2-week time definition has to do with, we have 2 weeks as community members, business owners, et cetera, to get our information to staff. And that does not mean that based on their backup of when they have to submit to you for documents for a hearing, it doesn't become a desk item, which is always cumbersome for all of us. So I'm not sure what that calendar timing is, and maybe you can help define that.
That's all good. I thought a week was not long enough, so I'm saying 2 weeks, and I understand, that doesn't include staff turning this thing around for our necessary for our next meeting, unless they could do that after getting your input in 2 weeks. So I'm good with that. So I'm going to go ahead and close the comments, and I'll go back. We have Ms. Armour, and then we have 2 commissioners. So.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to clarify that tonight's meeting, we are August 24th. 2 weeks from today would be September 7th. The full staff report packet for the next Planning Commission meeting goes out 2 days later on the 9th. So if written comments were received from the architects by the 7th, they would be in your full packet, and you would have the normal period of time to take a look at them. Though depending on when they are received, staff will have more or less time to provide responses in writing in advance of the meeting.
Okay, it sounds like we could work with that. And then if something doesn't occur as we expected, there's certainly is always the possibility of continuing to the second meeting in September. Correct? Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So then our date certain, if it's the will of the commission to do this, would be the first meeting in September.
September 14th.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Clark, and then Commissioner Jana.
Thank you. So just a couple of things for the photos. I know that Commissioner Thomas asked if we would more want them throughout the document or as an index at the end. And just my personal thought would be to have an image or two in the sections that are done through scoring. And it can say that these are the parts that are in it, and this is the score it would receive, just because I feel like that's where they started to look the most monotonous to some people, and where it gets kind of confusing to picture multiple being integrated. And then second, I see what you mean, Commissioner Thomas, about them still having that other option of not going through the ministerial process and still just using the normal one. But I think that it's really, really important that these objective standards are practical, and we really want them to be utilized. And so I think talking to the architects is a really, really good way to make sure that they're practical, or as practical as they can be. And I think we need to focus on not relying on somebody possibly using the other process, and really hoping that people will be able to take advantage of the objective standards.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Jana.
Just quickly, I think that given where we are with the promise of the architects to come back with us, then we should suspend our conversation tonight. We can have longer to look over the comments from the desk item, so we can incorporate those. But I feel like I have no idea where the architect changes might be. And so going through the document, I think doesn't make much sense at this point. And I would just agree that we're just really beating a horse here about the images, but images always speak more strongly when they're related to what the comments are talking about. So putting them at the end, and you've got to leave back and forth, however you do it online or in a hard copy, doesn't make too much sense to me. So I'd keep those images interwoven with the discussion so that the examples are clear, or put them, as Commissioner Clark suggested, with examples of how projects will be scored. That's it.
So I agree. I was not considering going through the document because I feel like there's enough support from the commission to continue that item, although we haven't gone through that process yet. I did want to weigh in about the pictures. I understanding that some of the complexities of doing pictures, I think we need to have some pictures. Especially, I think Commissioner Clark was spot on, especially that section where we're scoring a project. If we can get permission from a project to apply the score to them, it should be in the document, not at the end, and make it easy for people to understand how to implement the standards that we have. Because the whole idea is streamlining, so we need to make it easier for people and not complicated. So, I also wanted to comment on Commissioner Janos thought that we did get some good comments from Ms. Quintana in the desk item. I don't know that everyone had a chance to totally digest them, but one of the comments that was raised was, and it was raised before, was about having all of the objective standards from every other document included in this document. And staff did address that comment in the packet and said that that instead it would be references to the other documents, that it wasn't going to be in scope to do that much thorough of a document to pull in everything from the other document and put it in this document. So I will go to Vice Chair Barnett and then back to Commissioner Jana.
Yes, I'm prepared to make a motion to continue this hearing to September 14th, with the understanding that if we don't receive the architect's input within 2 weeks, that it'll be denied or just not considered for our further hearing.
Okay, and do I have a second for that? Commissioner Clark.
I second.
Thank you for that. And then Commissioner Jana, if you had your hand up, was it to make a motion?
No, it was to make a comment, but we can go ahead.
Okay. Well, before I call so we have a motion and a second to continue. I did want to ask if any commissioners would like to make comments before I call the question. Well, obviously, we'll have another chance to see this when it comes back to us. Commissioner Jana.
Sorry, just quickly. In the interest of transparency, I also wanted to underscore that the importance of actual images will be important to residents. You know, we're entering into some uncharted territory with the number and scale of the housing that we're looking for under the housing element. So and obviously this document is going to relate to that type of development. Having residents understand and see what this could look like, really beautiful additions to our community, I think were really important.
Thank you for that. Let's see. Vice Chair Bennett, did you still have your hand up? Did you have something else to say before we vote?
Sorry, I missed that.
Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Tabana.
I do just have a question for staff. Are we going to get another draft based on the few comments that we gave to you tonight? Or can we assume the draft we got tonight is what we'll also see in 3 weeks?
Based on the anticipation of all of the future comments we're going to get from the architects, it would be my preference and staff's preference to probably not go through and amend the document and try to collect all the feedback at one time.
Yes, I was going to say that I would hope that you would do whatever is going to be the least, like the most productive use of your time, since you're going to probably have to go back and edit it again after that next meeting. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Tabana.
Yes, I just have a question for the maker of the motion. If we do not receive comments by next, or I guess Wednesday the 4th, no, sorry, in 2 weeks' time, will it still be on the agenda for the meeting on September 14th?
If I may respond, that was certainly my intention that we would go forward with any remaining comments on the draft that we received with the staff report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments before I call the question? Commissioner Jana, if you have your hand up.
Yeah, just to clarify what the maker of the motion just stated in response to Commissioner Tivana, are you saying that if the architects came back and said we need another week, that we wouldn't give that continuance, or what? I'm not clear what you're going forward without the input means.
If I may respond, we had assurance that it absolutely could be provided within 2 weeks. And I should think that after all the delays and failure to respond to the outreach, that's reasonable.
And I also will weigh in. I heard from Ms. Worsma that 100%. I think she used the word 100% as well. That 2 weeks was going to work. So I think we should just proceed forward with that assumption. Any other questions, Commissioner Tivana?
Sorry, I just want to make sure that I know they said 100%, but there is always a chance we do not receive comments. So I just want to make sure, in case we do not receive comments, it still is on the agenda for the next meeting, regardless if we do or do not receive comments.
So I'm going to go ahead.
Just wanted to step in and clarify, this would be a continuance to the meeting on the 14th, regardless of whether any additional input was received between now and then. And then the commission would be considering the item and making a recommendation or continuing again if they so chose at that meeting. Since we don't yet have a recommendation on this item to town council, it wouldn't move forward without further discussion.
Okay, I think that works. And so it's going to be on the agenda one way or the other, because it's we're recommending a continuance. And you all have seen in the past where if something strange happens, then there's always the possibility of continuing again. But we really do need to finish this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call the question, and I will start with Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Tivana.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So it passes unanimously. And so there's no there's no recommendation. We're just continuing this to the meeting on the 14th. So that is all the items on our regular agenda. So we will proceed with the report from the Director of Community Development.
Thank you, Chair. We actually have nothing specific to report this evening.
Okay, all right. And then the next item on the agenda is subcommittee reports and commission matters. Every member of the Planning Commission, in addition to their service on the Planning Commission, serves on an additional committee. And in the case of the Planning Commission, we serve on the General Plan Committee, the Historic Preservation Committee, and the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee. This year and a half, the General Plan Committee has taken the form of the Housing Element Advisory Board, which in addition to all of the members of the General Plan Committee, we also have some members from the community that sit on that board as well. And until that housing element is completed, that'll be the main function of the General Plan Committee, is to be part of the Housing Element Advisory Board. So are there any subcommittee meetings that occurred since our last Planning Commission meeting on the 10th? I can at least report on the Housing Element Advisory Board. We did have a meeting on last Thursday on the 18th, in which we went over the draft of the entire housing element and are proceeding forward with releasing that for public comment. And then in addition, after public comment, it will be forwarded along for review, the first review by Housing and Community Development, who ultimately will certify the document. Were there any other committee meetings? Commissioner Clark.
Yes, the Historic Preservation Committee met today at 4 p.m. We approved 2 requests for removal from the Historic Resources Inventory, and we approved the construction of an addition to a building in the downtown historic commercial district. And then we also forwarded a recommendation to the Community Development Director on allowing variances to an accessory structure.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Clark. So it sounds like, and there was no CDAC meeting. Okay.
Correct. It has not been.
Okay, very good. Do any commissioners have anything else they'd like to contribute before I adjourn the meeting? I don't see any hands raised, so I thank all the commissioners for their service to the Planning Commission and in their other capacities. And we will see you all on September 14th. This meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Good night.